The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as 16-year-old Marcus Johnson walked toward the local convenience store. His basketball sneakers squeaked against the sidewalk as he clutched a crumpled $10 bill in his palm. His grandmother had asked him to pick up milk and bread for breakfast, a simple errand that should have taken 15 minutes at most. Marcus had lived in this quiet suburban neighborhood for 3 years now, ever since his family moved here from the city. His father worked as an electrician, and his mother taught elementary school. They had saved for years to afford a house in this area, drawn by the good schools and safe streets. Marcus knew most of his neighbors by sight, though few had ever spoken to him beyond polite nods. As he approached the store, Marcus noticed a woman in her early 30s standing near the entrance. Sarah Mitchell had moved to the neighborhood just 6 months ago with her husband and 2 young children. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a local company and prided herself on being observant about her surroundings. Today, she wore designer jeans and a crisp white blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. Sarah watched as Marcus approached the store entrance. Something about his presence made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. He was tall for his age, wearing a dark hoodie and baggy jeans. To Sarah, he looked out of place in their neighborhood. She had never seen him before, or at least she didn't remember seeing him. Marcus pushed open the glass door and disappeared inside the store. Through the windows, Sarah could see him walking down the aisles. He picked up a gallon of milk from the refrigerated section and grabbed a loaf of bread from the shelf. The entire transaction took less than 5 minutes, but to Sarah, it felt like he was taking an unusually long time. Her imagination began to run wild. Was he looking around too much? Was he acting suspicious? She pulled out her phone and pretended to check her messages while keeping an eye on the store entrance. Her heart started beating faster as various scenarios played through her mind. She had recently read news stories about break-ins in nearby neighborhoods, and the local community Facebook group was always sharing warnings about suspicious activity. When Marcus emerged from the store with his small paper bag, Sarah made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. She stepped closer to her car and dialed 911, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the numbers. The dispatcher answered on the second ring with a professional, calm voice. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked. Sarah took a deep breath before speaking. I'd like to report suspicious activity in my neighborhood. There's a young black male who doesn't belong here, and he's been acting strangely around the convenience store on Maple Street. The dispatcher began asking standard questions about the location, the nature of the suspicious activity, and whether there was any immediate threat. Sarah described Marcus as possibly casing the area and mentioned that she had never seen him in the neighborhood before. She emphasized that he looked out of place and was wearing clothing that made her nervous. Marcus, completely unaware of the phone call being made about him, began his walk home. He pulled out his own phone to text his grandmother that he had successfully completed his mission. The milk was cold in the bag, and he wanted to get it home quickly. He had homework to finish before basketball practice that afternoon, and his mind was already focused on the geometry test he had the next day. As he walked down the familiar street, Marcus noticed the same woman from the store entrance now sitting in her car, talking on the phone. She seemed to be looking in his direction, but he didn't think much of it. People talked on phones all the time, and it was probably just a coincidence that she was parked nearby. What Marcus didn't know was that 3 police cars were already being dispatched to his location. The 911 call had triggered a standard response protocol, and officers were en route to investigate the reported suspicious activity. Sarah remained in her car, watching Marcus's every move and providing updates to the dispatcher about his location and direction of travel. The irony of the situation was lost on everyone involved in that moment. Sarah had no idea that the very person who would soon be responding to her call had a personal connection that would make this incident far more complicated than she could have imagined. Marcus continued his innocent walk home, completely unaware that his simple trip to buy milk and bread was about to become a life-changing experience. The wheels of consequence were already in motion, set in motion by assumptions, fear, and a phone call that would soon reach the desk of someone who would not be pleased with what they were about to hear. The morning that had started so peacefully was about to become anything but ordinary for everyone involved. The radio crackled to life in Police Chief Patricia Mitchell's office as the dispatch came through. She was reviewing budget reports when the familiar voice of her dispatcher interrupted her concentration. A suspicious person call on Maple Street caught her attention immediately, not because it was unusual, but because that was her street, her neighborhood, the place where she had recently moved with her family. Chief Mitchell was a 20-year veteran of the police force, having worked her way up from patrol officer to the highest position in the department. She was known for her fair but firm approach to law enforcement and had implemented several community policing initiatives during her tenure. Her reputation was built on treating every citizen with respect and ensuring her officers did the same. As she listened to the details of the call, something felt uncomfortably familiar. The description of the caller matched her neighbor, and the location was just a few blocks from her own house. But it was the description of the supposed suspicious person that made her stomach drop. A teenage black male in a hoodie, carrying a bag from the convenience store, walking through her neighborhood. The dispatcher continued relaying information from the ongoing call. The caller was providing real-time updates about the teenager's movements, describing him as definitely suspicious and insisting that he didn't belong in the area. Chief Mitchell closed her eyes and took a deep breath, hoping her growing suspicion was wrong. Officer Williams, a 5-year veteran known for his level-headed approach, was the first to respond to the scene. He had worked with Chief Mitchell for 3 years and respected her leadership style. As he drove toward Maple Street, he followed standard protocol, approaching the situation with caution, but without predetermined assumptions about guilt or innocence. Meanwhile, Marcus had turned onto his own street, just 2 blocks away from home. He was thinking about the basketball game scheduled for Friday night and wondering if his parents would be able to attend. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend asking about plans for the weekend. As he typed a response while walking, he noticed a police car turning onto his street. At first, Marcus didn't think anything of it. Police cars were not uncommon in any neighborhood, and officers often patrolled residential areas as part of their regular duties. But as the car slowed down and began following him at a distance, a familiar feeling of unease crept into his chest. He had experienced this before in their previous neighborhood, and he hoped it wasn't happening again. Officer Williams observed the teenager from his patrol car, noting that he appeared to be simply walking home with a grocery bag. The young man wasn't behaving erratically, wasn't looking around nervously, and wasn't doing anything that would typically be considered suspicious. In fact, he seemed to be minding his own business, texting on his phone like any other teenager. The officer decided to make contact. Not because he believed Marcus was doing anything wrong, but because he wanted to resolve the situation quickly and professionally. He pulled his car alongside Marcus and rolled down the window. His approach was friendly but official, following the community policing guidelines that Chief Mitchell had established. "Excuse me, young man," Officer Williams called out politely. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Marcus stopped walking and turned toward the police car, his heart rate immediately increasing. He had been taught by his parents how to interact with police officers, lessons that many of his white classmates never needed to learn. Keep your hands visible, be respectful, answer questions clearly, and don't make sudden movements. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "Is there a problem?" Officer Williams stepped out of his patrol car, noting immediately that Marcus appeared calm and cooperative. "We received a call about someone acting suspiciously in the area. I'm just checking to make sure everything's okay. Do you live around here?" Marcus nodded toward the house at the end of the block. "Yes, sir. I live right there with my parents and grandmother. I just went to the store to get milk and bread." He held up the paper bag as evidence of his innocent errand. The officer could see that Marcus was being truthful. Everything about the situation suggested a simple misunderstanding. But before he could wrap up the interaction, 2 more patrol cars arrived on the scene, having been dispatched as backup. The situation was quickly escalating beyond what was necessary. Back at the police station, Chief Mitchell was monitoring the radio traffic with growing concern. She heard Officer Williams' calm voice describing a cooperative teenager who appeared to be doing nothing wrong, but she also heard the arrival of additional units, which meant the situation was being treated as potentially serious. Unable to stay in her office any longer, Chief Mitchell decided to drive to the scene herself. As the police chief, she rarely responded to routine calls, but something about this situation demanded her personal attention. She had a sinking feeling that this incident was about to become much more complicated than a simple suspicious person call. What she didn't yet know was that her own daughter, Sarah, was the person who had initiated this entire sequence of events. The family connection that would soon be revealed would force Chief Mitchell to confront not only a problematic police response but also some uncomfortable truths about her own family and the community she had sworn to serve and protect. Chief Mitchell arrived at the scene to find 3 patrol cars surrounding a teenage boy who was standing calmly on the sidewalk, still holding his grocery bag. The sight immediately confirmed her worst fears. This was exactly the kind of situation she had worked hard to prevent in her department, and seeing it unfold in her own neighborhood made it even more troubling. As she approached the scene, she could see Marcus answering questions from Officer Williams while 2 other officers stood nearby. The teenager appeared composed, but clearly uncomfortable with the attention he was receiving. Chief Mitchell recognized the look in his eyes, a mixture of confusion and resignation that she had seen too many times in her career. "What's the situation here?" Chief Mitchell asked Officer Williams, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Officer Williams looked surprised to see the chief at what seemed like a routine call. "Chief, we received a suspicious person report. But honestly, this young man appears to be doing nothing wrong. He says he lives in the neighborhood and was just buying groceries. I was about to clear the call." Chief Mitchell nodded approvingly at Officer Williams' assessment. She turned to Marcus with a professional but kind demeanor. "Son, I'm Chief Mitchell. I apologize for the inconvenience. Can you tell me what happened today?" Marcus looked at the police chief with a mixture of respect and wariness. "Ma'am, I just went to the store to buy milk and bread for my grandmother. I live right there." He pointed to his house, which was now clearly visible. "I was walking home when the officer stopped me." As Chief Mitchell listened to Marcus's account, she noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Her heart sank as she recognized her daughter Sarah sitting inside, still on the phone. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together in the most uncomfortable way possible. "Officers, please return to your regular patrols," Chief Mitchell instructed her team. "This appears to be a misunderstanding. Thank you for your professional response." She then turned back to Marcus. "Again, I apologize for this inconvenience. You're free to go home." Marcus thanked the chief and began walking toward his house, relieved that the encounter was over, but still shaken by the experience. He couldn't understand why someone would call the police on him for simply walking in his own neighborhood. As he reached his front door, he could see his grandmother watching from the window, worry etched across her face. Chief Mitchell walked across the street toward her daughter's car, her jaw set in a firm line. Sarah was just ending her phone call with the dispatcher when she saw her mother approaching. The look on Chief Mitchell's face told Sarah immediately that she was in serious trouble. "Mom," Sarah said, rolling down her window with forced cheerfulness, "what are you doing here? I didn't expect to see you." "I'm here because of the 911 call you made," Chief Mitchell replied, her voice controlled but clearly angry. "The call about a suspicious teenager who turned out to be a 16-year-old boy buying groceries and walking home in his own neighborhood." Sarah's face flushed red as she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. "I didn't know he lived here. He looked suspicious and I've never seen him before. I was just trying to keep our neighborhood safe." Chief Mitchell's professional composure began to crack. "Sarah, that young man did absolutely nothing wrong. He bought milk and bread and walked home. How exactly was that suspicious behavior?" The conversation between mother and daughter was interrupted by the sound of a front door opening. Marcus's father, David Johnson, stepped onto his porch having heard the commotion outside. He was still wearing his work clothes from his morning shift at the electrical company. David had lived through situations like this before, both as a young man and now as a father watching his son experience the same treatment. He approached the police cars with caution, wanting to make sure his son was safe but also not wanting to escalate the situation. "Excuse me, Chief," David called out respectfully. "Is my son in some kind of trouble?" Chief Mitchell turned to face David, her expression softening. "No, sir. Your son is not in trouble. There was a misunderstanding, and I want to personally apologize for any distress this may have caused your family." David studied the police chief's face and saw genuine remorse there. "I appreciate that, Chief. But I have to ask, what kind of misunderstanding leads to 3 police cars responding to a teenager buying groceries?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Chief Mitchell knew she owed this family more than just an apology. She glanced back at her daughter, who was now looking down at her hands in shame and then back at David. "Mr. Johnson, someone called 911 reporting suspicious activity. My officers responded professionally, but the call itself was based on assumptions rather than actual wrongdoing. I take full responsibility for ensuring this doesn't happen again." Sarah finally spoke up from her car, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I really thought he was acting suspicious. I was just worried about our neighborhood." David looked at the young woman who had called the police on his son. He saw fear in her eyes, but also ignorance. "Ma'am, my family has lived in this neighborhood for 3 years. My son walks to that store regularly. The only thing suspicious about today was your decision to call the police on a child doing an errand for his grandmother." The weight of David's words settled over everyone present. Chief Mitchell realized this incident would require more than just apologies. It would demand real conversation, education, and perhaps most difficult of all, a hard look at the assumptions and biases that had led to this moment. The drive home was silent between Chief Mitchell and her daughter Sarah. The police chief gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, her mind racing with the implications of what had just occurred. She had spent years building trust between the police department and the community, implementing bias training and community outreach programs. Now her own daughter had undermined those efforts in a single phone call. Sarah stared out the passenger window, replaying the morning's events in her mind. She had genuinely believed she was doing the right thing by reporting what she perceived as suspicious behavior. But seeing the hurt in Marcus's eyes and the disappointment in her mother's face made her question everything she thought she knew about safety and community. When they arrived home, Chief Mitchell's husband, Robert, was in the kitchen preparing lunch. He immediately sensed the tension between his wife and daughter. Robert worked as a high school counselor and had experience dealing with difficult conversations, but he had never seen his wife look quite so serious. "What happened?" Robert asked, setting down his coffee mug. Chief Mitchell looked at Sarah, giving her the opportunity to explain the situation herself. Sarah took a shaky breath before recounting the morning's events. As she spoke, Robert's expression grew increasingly concerned, not just about the incident itself, but about what it revealed regarding his daughter's mindset. "Sarah," Robert said gently but firmly, "what specifically made you think Marcus was acting suspiciously?" Sarah struggled to articulate her reasoning. "He was wearing a hoodie, and he was walking around the store for what seemed like a long time. I'd never seen him before, and he just looked like he didn't belong there." "Didn't belong where?" Chief Mitchell interjected. "In a public store? In his own neighborhood?" The questions forced Sarah to confront the uncomfortable truth about her assumptions. She had profiled Marcus based on his appearance and race, not on any actual suspicious behavior. The realization was both embarrassing and enlightening. Meanwhile, at the Johnson household, Marcus was trying to process what had happened. His grandmother, Eleanor, had made him sit down at the kitchen table while she examined him as if checking for injuries. Eleanor had lived through the civil rights era and had hoped her grandson would never have to experience the kind of discrimination she had faced. "Baby, you did everything right," Eleanor told Marcus, her voice filled with both pride and sadness. "You were polite, respectful, and you didn't do anything to escalate the situation. But the fact that you had to be perfect just to walk home safely is what breaks my heart." Marcus's mother, Jennifer, arrived home from her teaching job to find her family discussing the morning's incident. As an elementary school teacher, she had dedicated her career to educating children about diversity and inclusion. Learning that her own son had been subjected to racial profiling in their neighborhood felt like a personal and professional blow. "We need to talk to the school about this," Jennifer said after hearing the full story. "Marcus shouldn't have to worry about being targeted by neighbors just for existing in his own community." David shook his head. "This isn't just about Marcus or our family. This is about a mindset that sees black teenagers as threats by default. That woman probably considers herself a good person, but her actions today could have ended very differently if the wrong officers had responded." The gravity of David's statement wasn't lost on anyone in the room. They all knew stories of police encounters that had escalated tragically, and the thought of Marcus being caught in such a situation was terrifying. Back at the Mitchell house, Chief Mitchell was making phone calls to ensure the incident was properly documented and reviewed. She wanted to make sure her officers had handled the situation correctly and that protocols were followed. Officer Williams' professional response had potentially prevented the situation from becoming much worse. "I'm implementing additional bias training for the entire department," Chief Mitchell told her husband. "But this incident shows that the problem isn't just within law enforcement. It's in our community, in our assumptions about who belongs where and who poses a threat." Sarah overheard her mother's conversation and felt the weight of responsibility for creating this situation. She had always considered herself an open-minded person, but her actions today had revealed unconscious biases she didn't even know she possessed. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would require considerable courage. She asked her mother for Marcus's family's contact information. Chief Mitchell was initially hesitant, concerned about putting the Johnson family in an uncomfortable position, but she ultimately provided the information after calling David Johnson first to ask permission. "Mr. Johnson," Chief Mitchell said during the phone call, "my daughter would like to apologize to your family in person. I understand if you're not comfortable with that, but I wanted to give you the option." David discussed the request with his family. Marcus was initially reluctant, still feeling hurt and confused by the morning's events. But Jennifer, with her educator's perspective, saw an opportunity for genuine dialogue and learning. Sometimes, Jennifer said to her family, the best way to prevent future incidents is to help people understand the impact of their actions. If she's genuinely sorry and wants to learn, maybe we can help ensure this doesn't happen to another child. The stage was being set for a conversation that would challenge everyone involved to examine their assumptions, confront uncomfortable truths, and hopefully find a path toward better understanding. What had started as a simple trip to the store was evolving into a community-defining moment that would test everyone's capacity for growth and forgiveness. 3 days after the incident, Sarah Mitchell stood on the front porch of the Johnson family home, her hands trembling slightly as she rang the doorbell. Chief Mitchell had offered to accompany her, but Sarah felt this was something she needed to do alone. She had spent the past few days researching and reading about racial bias, trying to understand how her perceptions had been so wrong. David Johnson opened the door, his expression neutral but not unwelcoming. He had agreed to this meeting because his wife Jennifer believed in the power of education and dialogue, even in difficult circumstances. Behind him, the rest of the family had gathered in the living room, including Marcus, who sat quietly on the couch next to his grandmother Eleanor. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Sarah began, her voice shaky with nerves. "I know I have no right to ask for your time after what I did, but I needed to apologize in person and try to make things right." David stepped aside to let her in. The Johnson home was warm and welcoming, filled with family photos and Marcus's basketball trophies. Sarah noticed a picture of Marcus in his school uniform, smiling brightly, which made her feel even worse about the assumptions she had made about him. As Sarah entered the living room, she was struck by the dignity and grace of the family who had gathered to hear her out. Eleanor, despite her advanced age and the discrimination she had faced throughout her life, looked at Sarah with curiosity rather than anger. Jennifer maintained her teacher's composure, ready to listen and potentially educate. Marcus avoided eye contact, still processing his own feelings about the encounter. "I want to start by saying that I was completely wrong," Sarah said, addressing the entire family. "I called the police on Marcus not because of anything he did, but because of my own ignorance and fear. I realize now that my actions were based on racial bias, and I'm deeply ashamed of that." Eleanor spoke first, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had seen both the worst and best of humanity. "Child, the fact that you're here tells me something about your character. Many people would have just tried to forget this happened and move on with their lives." Sarah wiped away tears that had started forming. "Mrs. Johnson, I can't just move on. What I did was wrong, and it could have had terrible consequences. I've been reading about other incidents where 911 calls like mine led to tragedy, and I can't live with knowing I could have put Marcus in danger." Marcus finally looked up at Sarah, studying her face as she spoke. He had expected anger or defensiveness, but what he saw was genuine remorse and a desire to understand. It didn't erase the hurt he felt, but it was a beginning. Jennifer leaned forward in her chair. "Sarah, can you help us understand what you were thinking that morning? What made you feel that Marcus was suspicious?" The question forced Sarah to confront the uncomfortable specifics of her thinking. "He was wearing a hoodie and he's tall for his age. He was in the store for what I thought was too long, though I realize now it was probably just a few minutes. But honestly, the main thing was that I had never seen him before, and I made the assumption that he didn't belong in our neighborhood. "But why didn't you just introduce yourself?" David asked. "If you'd never seen him before, why not find out who he was instead of calling the police?" Sarah paused, realizing she had never considered that option. "I think I was scared. But now I understand that my fear wasn't based on anything rational. It was based on stereotypes and assumptions I didn't even realize I had." Marcus spoke for the first time since Sarah had arrived. "Do you know how many times I've been followed in stores or had people cross the street when they see me coming? I'm 16 years old, I get good grades, I play basketball, and I help my grandmother with groceries. But none of that matters to some people when they look at me." The pain in Marcus's voice was evident, and it hit Sarah harder than any anger could have. She realized that her single phone call was part of a pattern of experiences that Marcus had to navigate regularly, simply because of his race. "Marcus, I can't undo what I did, but I want to learn from it," Sarah said. "I want to make sure I never make assumptions like this again, and I want to help others understand too." Jennifer saw an opportunity for positive action. "Sarah, would you be willing to speak about this experience at community meetings or neighborhood gatherings? Sometimes hearing from someone who made a mistake and learned from it can be more powerful than just hearing from the people who were hurt." The suggestion surprised Sarah, but she immediately saw the value in it. "Yes, absolutely. If sharing my mistake can help prevent this from happening to other families, then I want to do that." Chief Mitchell, who had been waiting in her car outside, was invited in for the final part of the conversation. She wanted to discuss concrete steps the police department could take to prevent similar incidents and improve community relations. "We're implementing additional training for our officers," Chief Mitchell explained. "But we also need to work with the community to address the root causes of calls like the one Sarah made. We're planning town halls and educational sessions about implicit bias and when it's appropriate to contact police." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That's good, but it's going to take more than training. It's going to take people being willing to examine their own hearts and minds, and that's not easy work." As the meeting concluded, something unexpected happened. Marcus stood up and extended his hand to Sarah. "I forgive you," he said simply, "but I hope you'll remember this feeling the next time you see someone who looks different from you." Sarah shook his hand, tears flowing freely now. "I will never forget this, Marcus, and I promise to do better." The conversation had been difficult and emotional, but it had also been productive. Both families left with a better understanding of each other and a commitment to working toward positive change in their community. What had started as a moment of bias and fear was transforming into an opportunity for growth and education. 6 months later, the Maple Street neighborhood had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. What began as a painful incident of racial profiling had evolved into a model for community healing and education. The changes were both visible and profound, touching the lives of everyone involved and rippling outward to affect the broader community. Sarah Mitchell had become an unlikely advocate for racial justice and bias awareness. She had spoken at 3 community meetings, sharing her story with raw honesty about how unconscious bias had led her to make a terrible mistake. Her presentations were difficult to give and sometimes uncomfortable for audiences to hear, but they were making a real impact. At the most recent town hall meeting, Sarah stood before a crowd of 200 neighbors, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. "I thought I was a good person who wasn't racist," she told the audience. "But good intentions don't matter if your actions cause harm. I had to learn the difference between not being racist and being actively anti-racist." The audience included people from all backgrounds, including several families who had moved to the neighborhood, specifically because of the community's commitment to addressing bias and promoting inclusion. Marcus and his family were in the front row, a show of support that still amazed Sarah every time she saw it. Chief Mitchell had implemented sweeping changes within the police department. The bias training program had been expanded and made mandatory for all officers, not just new recruits. The department had also established a community liaison program, where officers spent time in neighborhoods not as enforcers but as community members, building relationships and understanding. Officer Williams, who had handled the initial call so professionally, had become a leader in the community policing initiative. He regularly visited local schools to talk with students about positive police interactions and had developed a particular friendship with Marcus, occasionally attending his basketball games. The relationship between the Mitchell and Johnson families had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Sarah and Jennifer had discovered they shared interests in education and community service, leading to a friendship that surprised both of them. Their children had become friends as well, with Sarah's youngest daughter often playing with Marcus's 8-year-old sister. Marcus himself had channeled his experience into positive action. He had started a peer mediation program at his high school, helping students resolve conflicts and misunderstandings before they escalated. His leadership qualities, always present but now focused on social justice, had earned him recognition from teachers and community leaders. The convenience store where the incident began had become an unofficial community meeting place. The owner, Mr. Patel, had installed a bulletin board where neighbors could post messages, share resources, and announce community events. Marcus was now employed there part-time, and his presence had helped bridge relationships between the store and the community. Eleanor Johnson had become something of a neighborhood elder, sharing her wisdom about resilience and forgiveness with anyone who would listen. Her front porch had become a gathering place where people of all ages would stop by to hear her stories and seek her advice. Her perspective on how communities could heal from division had influenced many residents. The local newspaper had featured the neighborhood's transformation in a series of articles that gained national attention. Delegations from other communities had visited to learn about their approach to addressing racial bias and building inclusive communities. What had started as a local incident had become a model for positive change. David and Jennifer Johnson had been invited to speak at conferences about community, healing, and the importance of education in addressing bias. Jennifer had incorporated lessons from their experience into her elementary school curriculum, teaching young children about empathy, understanding differences, and the importance of getting to know people before making judgments about them. The changes weren't just interpersonal, but also structural. The Neighborhood Association had revised its mission statement to explicitly include promoting diversity and inclusion. They had established a diversity committee, co-chaired by Sarah and Jennifer, which organized cultural events and educational programs throughout the year. 1 year after the incident, the community held its first annual Unity Day celebration. The event featured food from different cultures, presentations about various traditions, and activities that brought neighbors together. Marcus gave a speech about forgiveness and growth, while Sarah spoke about the ongoing work of examining and confronting bias. Chief Mitchell, reflecting on the year's changes, had become a regional leader in police reform. Her department's approach to bias training and community engagement had been adopted by several other law enforcement agencies. She often said that her daughter's mistake had led to some of the most important work of her career. The incident had taught everyone involved that meaningful change requires more than good intentions. It demands honest self-examination, difficult conversations, and sustained effort to build understanding across differences. The transformation of Maple Street demonstrated that even painful mistakes could become catalysts for positive change when people were willing to do the hard work of growth and reconciliation. As Marcus walked that same route to the convenience store 1 year later, he was greeted by neighbors who knew his name, acknowledged by the police officer who waved from his patrol car, and welcomed by the store owner who considered him family. The street looked the same, but everything had changed. The journey from bias and fear to understanding and community had required courage from everyone involved, but it had created something beautiful and lasting in the process.